Johnny Carson was famous for control. 30 years of live television, never breaking character, never letting them see him vulnerable, never showing anything but the polished professional host America tuned in for every night. On July 19, 1991, the control broke. For weeks earlier, Johnny's son Rick had died in a car accident, 39 years old, photographing the California coastline he loved. The newspapers had run his driver's license photo unflattering, impersonal, not who Rick really was. Johnny couldn't let that be his son's legacy. So, when he returned to Tonight Show after 4 weeks of silence, Johnny did something he'd never done in 29 years. He asked America to see his son through a father's eyes. "I'm going to show you a picture of Rick," Johnny said, because the picture in papers after the accident was the one on his driver's license. "I don't think any of you will want to be remembered by the photo on your driver's license." A small laugh from the audience. Then Johnny showed Rick's photographs, the nature scenes Rick had captured, the artistry he developed, the passion he'd found. When Rick was around, he wanted to smile, Johnny said, tears forming. He had a laugh that was contagious as could be. He tried so darn hard to please. Johnny's voice cracked. He paused, looked at the photos of his son's work, and said 5 words that silenced the studio. "You'll have to forgive a father's pride in these pictures." In that moment, Johnny Carson wasn't the king of late night. He wasn't a host or an entertainer or a television legend. He was a father, showing the world his son's photographs, asking strangers to see what he saw, asking to understand why this loss was unbearable. Richard Walcott Carson was born during Johnny's first marriage to Jody Walcott. He was the middle of 3 sons, Chris, Rick, and Corey. Growing up as Johnny Carson's son wasn't easy. Johnny's career consumed him. The family moved constantly following Johnny's rising star from Nebraska to Los Angeles to New York and back to Los Angeles again. By the time Johnny became the host of The Tonight Show in 1962, his marriage to Jody was falling apart. The divorce was finalized that same year. Rick was 11 years old. The boys stayed with their mother while Johnny built an empire. Father and sons grew apart. It's a familiar story for children of celebrities. The parent becomes a public figure, and the private relationship suffers. Rick struggled to find his path. He tried to follow in his father's footsteps, working in television production. He was a stage manager and associate director on Tomorrow, the late-night show hosted by Tom Snyder that aired after The Tonight Show. But Rick carried demons. He battled addiction, had mental health struggles, was hospitalized at one point. The relationship with his famous father was complicated. Johnny was not the kind of man who discussed feelings, not the kind of father who knew how to bridge the distance his career had created. In the late 1980s, something changed for Rick. He discovered photography, nature photography specifically. The California coastline became his canvas. He'd drive up and down the Pacific Coast Highway, looking for the perfect light, the perfect angle, the perfect moment. Sometimes he'd leave before dawn, chasing the golden hour when the sun first touched the cliffs. Sometimes he'd stay until after sunset, waiting for that perfect purple twilight that made the ocean look like liquid silk. Photography gave Rick what he'd been searching for his entire life, a passion that was his own, not connected to his father's fame, not measured against Johnny Carson's success, just Rick, his camera, and the beauty of the natural world. He got good at it, really good. The photographs he took showed genuine artistry, an eye for composition, a patience for waiting until conditions were exactly right. Friends noticed a change in him. The restlessness that had defined his younger years began to fade. He talked about light and shadow the way other people talked about sports or politics. He'd found something worth waking up for. Rick had found himself. He was 39 years old, and for the first time in his life, he knew who he was. June 21st, 1991. 3 days after Rick's 39th birthday, he drove to Quilcos, a small town on the California coast north of San Luis Obispo, about 215 miles from Los Angeles. The area was popular with photographers and artists, dramatic cliffs, ocean views, the kind of scenery Rick loved to capture. He parked his 1991 Nissan Pathfinder on Calco's Drive, a paved service road off Highway 1, set up his equipment, started shooting. What happened next isn't entirely clear. The California Highway Patrol determined that Rick's vehicle was traveling at low speed, maybe 20 miles per hour, when it went over the edge. Perhaps he was repositioning for a better angle. Perhaps the wheels slipped. The Pathfinder plunged 125 foot down an embankment, landing within 800 for the Highway 1. Rick wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He was ejected from the vehicle. Photography equipment was found above the accident site, suggesting he'd been shooting when something went wrong. Richard Walcott Carson was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 39 years old. The news broke the same day. NBC released a statement. Everyone at NBC is deeply shocked and saddened by the sudden death of Ricky Carson. Our hearts go out to Johnny Carson and the entire family on this tragic loss. Johnny disappeared from public view. Guest hosts filled in on The Tonight Show. Jay Leno, Gary Shandling, others. America watched and waited, wondered if Johnny would come back, wondered how anyone comes back from burying their child. For 4 weeks, Johnny Carson was silent. He attended a private memorial service in Los Angeles. Rick's mother, Jody, learned of her son's death only after the service. She had been estranged from her children. The family dynamics were complicated, painful, never fully resolved. Now Rick was gone, and whatever reconciliation might have been possible was gone with him. On July 19, 1991, Johnny Carson returned to The Tonight Show. He walked onto the stage he'd walked onto 11,000 times before, but this time was different. The audience could see it in his face. The usual sparkle was dimmed. The professional mask was cracked. The studio felt different that night. Crew members who worked with Johnny for decades stood a little quieter. The usual pre-show energy was muted. Everyone knew what Johnny had been through. Everyone wondered how he'd handle it. Would he mention Rick? Would he pretend everything was normal? Would he break down? The band played him on like always, but the notes seemed to hang heavier in the air. Johnny began by thanking viewers for their letters thousands had written offering condolences, sharing their own stories of loss, reminding Johnny that even though he entertained millions, those millions cared about him as a person, not just a performer. First of all, I want to thank all of you who were so thoughtful, compassionate, and sympathetic with your letters, Johnny said. His voice was steady but fragile. Then he addressed the photograph, the driver's license photo that every newspaper had published, the image that had come to represent his son in death. I'm going to show you a picture of Rick, Johnny said, because the picture in papers after the accident was the one on his driver's license. I don't think any of you would want to be remembered by the photo on your driver's license. The audience laughed softly, Johnny's gift for finding humor even in darkness. But the laugh faded quickly as Johnny's real purpose became clear. He showed photographs of Rick, not driver's license photos, real photos. Rick smiling, Rick living, the man behind the name. Then Johnny showed Rick's work, the nature photographs his son had taken, the coastlines and sunsets and landscapes that Rick had captured in his final years, the passion project that had finally given Rick purpose. As the photographs appeared on screen, the music played. Riviera Paradise by Stevie Ray Vaughan, a blues instrumental. Stevie Ray Vaughan himself had died in a helicopter crash less than a year earlier in August 1990. Another artist taken too young, another accidental death. The choice of music was deliberate. Two artists, both gone before their time, their work living on. Johnny spoke about his son while the photographs displayed. When Rick was around, you wanted to smile, Johnny said, his voice caught. He had a laugh that was contagious as could be. He paused, gathered himself. He tried so darn hard to please. Those words hung in the air. He tried so darn hard to please. The weight of a complicated father-son relationship compressed into one sentence. Rick had spent his whole life trying to please a father who was never quite reachable, trying to find his place in the shadow of an American icon. And now Johnny was telling America that he knew, that he understood what Rick had been doing, that he saw his son's effort, even if he hadn't always shown it. Then came the line that broke everyone. Johnny looked at the photographs of Rick's work. Nature scenes, California coastline, the beauty his son had captured. You'll have to forgive a father's pride in these pictures, Johnny said. His voice cracked. Tears formed in his eyes. The king of late night crying on his own show, asking America, to forgive him for being proud of his dead son's photographs. There was nothing to forgive. Every parent watching understood. Every child who'd ever wanted their parents' approval understood. Johnny Carson wasn't performing grief. He was living it in front of 18 million people. But the losses weren't over. Johnny mentioned something else that night, something that added another layer to his grief. Michael Landon, who was suffering through cancer at the time, called to express his sympathy. Johnny said. A week later, Michael was gone. Michael Landon, star of Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie and Highway to Heaven, another television legend, Johnny's friend. When Rick died on June 21st, Michael Landon picked up the phone and called Johnny, offered condolences, offered support. What Johnny didn't fully realize at the time was that Michael Landon was dying. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed in April 1991. Terminal. Michael Landon, fighting for his own life with maybe weeks left to live, called Johnny Carson to comfort him about the loss of his son. Michael Landon died on July 1st, 1991, 8 days after Rick, 10 days after that phone call. Johnny had lost his son and his friend within 2 weeks of each other. Standing on that stage on July 19th, Johnny acknowledged the weight of it all. These have not been the most happy several weeks, he said. The understatement was pure Johnny, always controlled, always measured, even when describing the worst period of his life. The tribute to Rick lasted only a few minutes. Johnny didn't dwell, didn't milk the emotion, showed the photographs, said his piece, and moved on with the show. That was his way. Professional to the end. But those few minutes changed how America saw Johnny Carson. For 29 years, he'd been the perfect host. Funny, charming, unflappable. Now they'd seen something else. A father's grief, a father's pride, a father's love for a son he'd maybe never fully expressed it to, while the son was alive. The photographs Rick had taken, the ones Johnny showed that night, became part of Johnny's legacy. When Johnny hosted his final Tonight Show on May 22, 1992, less than a year after Rick's death, the very last image shown during the final credits was one of Rick's photographs. A nature scene, a sunset, the work of a son who'd finally found his purpose. Johnny's final gift to Rick, making sure America remembered not the driver's license photo, but the art, the beauty, the man Rick had become. Johnny Carson never fully recovered from Rick's death. Friends said he was never quite the same afterward. The spark dimmed slightly. The joy became harder to access. He retired less than a year later in May 1992. The retirement had been planned before Rick's death, but some wondered if the loss accelerated Johnny's desire to step away, to stop performing, to grieve in private. After retirement, Johnny virtually disappeared, rarely gave interviews, rarely appeared in public, lived quietly in Malibu with his fourth wife, Alexis, played tennis, watched the ocean, sent occasional jokes to David Letterman, but mostly he was silent. The man who talked to America every night for 30 years, barely talked to anyone at all. Johnny Carson died on January 23, 2005. He was 79 years old. Emphysema from decades of smoking. In the tributes that followed, people remember the jokes, the guests, the cultural impact. But many also remember July 19, 1991, the night Johnny showed them his son's photographs, the night he asked them to forgive a father's pride, the night the king of late night became just a father, missing his boy. Rick Carson's photographs still exist. The nature scenes he captured on the California coast, the work he was doing when he died. Not many people have seen them. They're not famous. But to Johnny Carson, they represented everything his son had become, everything Rick had accomplished on his own, everything a father could be proud of. If you've ever lost someone before you could say everything you want to say, you understand what Johnny felt that night. The words that come too late, the pride that should have been expressed sooner. The photographs have become unbearably precious because the photographer is gone. Johnny Carson taught America something important on July 19th, 1991. He taught us that grief doesn't care about fame, doesn't care about success, doesn't care about 30 years of making people laugh. Grief comes for everyone. And when it comes, all you can do is show up, say what you need to say, show the photographs, ask forgiveness for a father's pride, and hope that somewhere, somehow, your son knows you loved him. Subscribe for more stories about the moments that revealed who Johnny Carson really was. Share with someone who understands the weight of complicated family relationships, and comment below. What would you want people to remember about you? Because Rick Carson didn't want to be remembered by his driver's license photo. He wanted to be remembered for his work, his art, his photographs of the California coast. Thanks to his father, that's exactly how he's remembered, not as Johnny Carson's troubled son, as a photographer who found his passion, who tried so darn hard to please, who had a laugh that was contagious as could be. That's the legacy Johnny gave Rick on July 19th, 1991. A father's final gift, a father's pride,